Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. This is Michael Rochelle, the Chief Strategy Officer here at the Brennan Hall Group, and I'm very excited that you could all join us today. I know we're all busy. Mindshare is definitely a competitive environment, but I think you're really going to enjoy this team of experts as we walk through probably one of the hottest topics in learning today, which is leveraging data and analytics. This is an all you need to know roundtable discussion, and just want to quickly introduce our speakers, which are Leslie, Angela, Robert. And Leslie, maybe you can introduce yourself first.
Hello, I'm Leslie Farinella. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here at Xyleme. So happy to be here today. Excited about this topic.
Great.
Angela?
I'm Angela Williams, and I manage the content platform as a service here at Cisco. And I am also excited to be here with you today.
Last but not least, Robert.
Yeah, Robert Young. I work for Charter Communications, better known to the world as Spectrum, and oversee our learning technology and our learning analytics functions. So, and make me a third for excited to be here.
All right, it's unanimous. We're all excited to be here, and we're looking forward to talking more about it. Let's just jump into a few of the logistics about us getting together today. I want to first thank you very much, Xylem, for sponsoring this. A leader in this space, and you'll have an opportunity to hear directly from Leslie about all the great things that they're doing, along with what's happening at Cisco and at Charter as well. Let's talk a little bit about Brennan Hall Group. We're the preeminent research and analyst firm in the area of HCM. We like to think that we do a great job with being able to provide people like yourselves with unique data and insights about best and next practices in HCM. But what we're most excited about is when we're able to pull together a round table of experts like this and talk about a very important topic and introduce and get a chance for you to meet a clear leader in the space at Xyleme. When we talk about our ongoing research of best and next practices, you can see that we have surveys that are always open. And these are just a couple that, if you'd like to be able to take them, we'll also provide you individualized results so you can get a chance to measure up against what other folks said as well in these surveys. This is a little bit about how everything works. We strongly encourage you asking questions. You can just drop them in the chat and we'll be able to pull those out. There's the handouts, and the recording will be available as well after we close out this roundtable today. And you can always feel free to chat with us ongoing. We're not going to have any polls today. We're going to actually be displaying the very cool results that came back from the registration questions that you answered. And so we're really looking forward, and feel free to ask as many questions as you like. We really want to get all of your questions answered and give you an opportunity to be able to kind of push forward those pressing things that are on your mind. Okay, so here we go. Is our team ready? They look ready. They're excited and they're ready. So let's jump in. So these are the 4 points that we brought up when you were first registering and you were reading the overview of today's roundtable. We want to come back to these now and begin to offer the answers, or at least the point of view of the team of experts, and you can weigh in as well. So just as a quick refresher, we were going after, and I think we all agree that data and analytics is not just reporting. It goes far beyond that. Data and analytics is about providing insights and directions on where learning is going, and are we meeting the mark, and are we delivering those business impact results and performance results that we're all being asked to do. It's an overwhelming topic for many organizations. So we're going to talk about how to get started with data and analytics. There is a first step, believe it or not, and it's a long journey, but it's a fruitful one. The other is that we want to be able to make sure that we're able to collect data from around the enterprise. And what we mean by that is that it's more than just learning data that's going to help us with learners. So how do you capture all sorts of employee and organizational data, bring that together so we can really understand what's driving learner engagement, the ability for learners to have maximum depth and retention of learning, all those great things. And then you got to make sure that you have a central repository for data and content. We got to make sure it's scrubbed, stratified, lake, all those great terms that you hear now. We got to make sure this is all important. And I'm going to ask the team to weigh in now and give us our thoughts on, where do you see these things? How do we get this all to work right? What are you doing inside of your organization to make this all happen? And I'm going to get started with Angela on this if we could.
Oh, great. So it's really interesting. So in our organization, we've centralized the systems, but decentralized the content strategy. So my team, we actually work with multiple stakeholders and business entities within Cisco, and they're all at different levels of maturity. So it's been very exciting to watch them grow and learn from one another and from my team. So for example, we have organizations that are literally just looking at the reports, looking at the numbers, just getting to know what those numbers mean on the paper. But then we have other organizations that are tying the analytics back to recurring revenue and business outcomes. And they've fully realized the utility of the business insights that can come from the learning consumption data.
Yeah, and Robert, I'm curious too, like how do you're another huge organization, like how do you do this data set gathering and analytics, across a very complex, very big organization? How does it all happen, right?
Yeah, so I'd love to tell you it's all solved and we've got it figured out, but this is very much a thing that is constantly in motion, and I think that's going to be true for a long time. And some of the points that are on the screen are really important. So the first thing I think is like trying to understand what do we want to do with our data, and like to what end. And we have a motto on my team that it has to drive decisions or actions, and if it's not doing that, why are we doing it? And once you kind of have that base, it becomes a lot easier to communicate to partners. It becomes a lot easier to speak to the value of partnering with people. And we have taken a data lake approach, and we're working with our internal big data team to make that happen. It was funny because when we first started, we were kind of like, well, would we qualify for big data? And after getting a look at our data, they're like, oh yeah, you guys have big data. And so that kind of process, really thinking through what you want to do, working with partners, and getting your data into a place where it can be accessed not just by you, but by other people who want to bring learning data into what they're doing. It's key. Like flatten out that whole thing. Don't hold on to your data. Share it back and forth. It's a huge part of where we're seeing success.
I think it's interesting too. There's such a misnomer about how data is used. I have one anecdote. For example, one team thought that their video strategy was amazing, and there was one particular video that was getting so many more hits than everything else, and one particular part of that video. But looking at it in more depth and through a decision-making lens, they realized that that part of the video was not effective, and that's why everyone was having to go back. So it's not just more hits equals good content. You have to look at why the more hits are happening there.
Yeah, that's important. And Leslie, I mean, we've known each other a long time. We've talked about many of the challenges and opportunities around this slide, but I'm always pulled into the last one because that has to be a big focus of technology, is creating that central repository for data and content to drive everything that Robert and Angela are talking about. Maybe you can speak to that from your unique perspective.
I think a lot of what we see is breaking down the silos. So I think that part of it, Xyleme's always been about how do we get our content in a central repository? How do we make it so people can search and find it, they can use it, and we can distribute it out? But we're finding a lot of it is now, how do I break down those silos so that we understand who else has that content? So that's one data point, like what's even in my repository? What even do I have? But more importantly than what's driving that from the business, which is data about what does the business need? So what are those skill sets? Where are the gaps? Where are they looking into the future? So we're all reskilling and upskilling and looking at that. And then how do we as learning professionals, if we understand that data around where the business wants to go and what we need, do I have the materials and the content that can then drive towards that? So where are my gaps? So I think a lot of it then goes between that cohesion of what, and I want Robert to chime in about this. I hope, Robert, I'm not making you say something that you don't want to see on camera, but I love that they're looking at the whole journey of the learner. Like, so because the journey isn't just I'm a novice and I go into the classroom and I do my 2 weeks. The journey is, okay, what did I do after that? Like, how did I apply it? And then how did I get to the next level? And what was my career progression? And what were those certificates I got in between, or those special projects? So there's a lot more data, and we've got to bring down a lot of these silos across how we look at our content, how do we create it, but also we collect the data across that and then deliver it seamlessly across the organization. So I don't know, Robert, hopefully I'm not pushing you into a corner, but I just love how you guys are trying to figure out that bigger picture in that journey.
Yeah, and again, I go back to trying is that key piece, right? Like, you got to keep at it, because it's not a magic thing that you just hit the little button on the side of your desk and it's done. But you're exactly right. So, and that's where that partnership comes in. So, when we try to think about, things that are even bigger picture than like, did this particular training that we did drive, 2% increase in sales? That's wonderful when you get that data. But you take a lens, a bigger lens, and you say, so is our training actually helping people stay with the company, to feel good about their jobs, to feel effective in their jobs? And are we seeing more retention coming out of these things that we're doing? And are we building paths that are actually going to help people get to, career mobility internally or externally, or, across business units? Like, those are the things that we're really focused on trying to figure out, is kind of that next level, like, organizational big picture of what's the impact of learning.
I absolutely agree, Robert, because I think that, we all talked about Kirkpatrick, whether we achieved it or not. We were all kind of stuck in the smiley faces, but I think maybe I shouldn't say this, we just throw that away. Because at the end of the day, it's about, can I do my job? Can I fill open roles? Like, within the organization, when a role comes open, do I have people who are ready and able to step into that role? How quickly can I fill roles internally? Because we know when there's internal mobility, people stay because they see a path for themselves within the organization. So if we look at proficiency in your job, how mobile the workforce is, so how many people are we promoting, and when it comes open, can we fill that job? That seems like that's the right metric, because if we can do that, we've got learning right, and it's probably because we're doing 100 things right, not because we're doing 2 or 3 things right. It's because we've got a cohesive system, because we all know that learning, at the end of the day, it's a system of reinforcing events. It's not any single event. And as long as we're looking at our data as, like Robert said, these single events, we're missing the big picture. Not that there isn't some nuggets in that. So Angela was actually, is right as well. There are great nuggets in those single events, but the real power is when we can look across those events.
Right. Well, and it's really interesting too from our perspective, because we're doing internal training for the employees at Cisco. We host that content, but we also host a ton of product enablement content. So we're tying that content. So when I was talking about recurring revenue, we're able to tie the learning content with the actual product telemetry, and then with the sales and recurring revenue outcomes. And that's been, from a strategic perspective, a really interesting vantage point of how we can use the data. But all of our groups, one of the things that we found is all of our groups have different business objectives. So we're looking at some analytic strategies that go across all of them, but then we have marketing data strategy for, and then we have, product enablement data strategy. And it's been really interesting to see where the learning content analytics weaves across all of those, but then where some of them are siloed and have a unique vantage point and business insights that are valuable to the individual groups.
That's great. I love that. So,
and I'll stick up a little for Kirkpatrick too and say, like, it goes back to that question of, like, what is your purpose with your data? And it is perfectly valid also if you're running a big program and you're like investing a ton of effort in something, you should absolutely be measuring it. And that's kind of the challenge, right? Kirkpatrick is really focused on more a single initiative. It's hard to scale. That's been my frustration in terms of, like, what's the model for scale? Like, how do we do this for 100,000 employee company? And there isn't a Kirkpatrick equivalent that's out there yet. But I think if that is where your focus is, if that's if your purview as you're listening to this is, hey, I'm responsible for sales training, like, man, measure the heck out of sales training. Like, get it tied to those metrics, and don't forget, one of the things I think is easy to forget, sometimes we're making big changes in the background and big things moving under the hood. And sometimes, like, man, if we are able to make that change and keep things just where they were, like, that's a perfectly valid thing to go after. It doesn't always have to be like, man, look, we went up 17%, or like, we kept the wheels on the bus here in a really challenging environment with a lot of system movement. So yeah, I just want to make sure, we do want to look at the big picture, and that is ultimately where, I think the big stories are going to come from. But don't give up because that's not right in front of you, or you don't have purview over that. Do what you can.
Let's take a step back. So we sound like pros on the call. Mission accomplished. We sound like we know what we're talking about, but what was that first moment when you moved from just reporting and you got started with data and analytics? What was that first step like? What did you do first? If people, we don't necessarily feel all comfortable with doing this, and we may be at different levels of maturity with it, but it would be nice to kind of hear, what was the first move? How did we get this data organized? How did we begin to rely on that data to do analytics and not just report out, retrospectively what's already happened? It would be great for the audience to be able to hear what were those first steps.
I think the first step for most is you have that aha moment. Like, we all have our data and the spreadsheet, and we're doing our pivot table, and we start to see, there might be something here. This is useful. And I think, once finding out what's useful versus interesting is kind of I think one of the hardest first steps. And once you figure out that, to Robert's point, the second step is, how do I sustain this and scale it? Because how many of us, has reporting? I almost take reporting as like the chore part of data. If I'm reporting, it's a chore. I'm having to pull down the data, and I'm manually cleansing it, and I'm updating this table, and I'm spending, a couple hours a week trying to do that. That, to me, is kind of reporting. You start to get to data and analytics when you start to put that process and some of the procedure around it, and bring some tools and mechanics to bear so that the data continues to feed. And now you have something that you're looking at. It's a tool. It's not a chore. So to me, that's kind of, when I passed over was when I realized that data and analytics is a tool. And if it's a chore, I'm probably still at reporting, but also the interesting versus useful. I think a lot of us have gotten those interesting reports, but that there's no action. So the other piece is, can I run my fingers through it? Can I drill down into it? Can I turn it to the side? Can I slice and dice it? When I can start to play and look at the nuances in my data, now it starts to sing, and it gives you more information than just that static report.
Yeah, I'd like to take that a step further. I can remember my aha moment. it came from an executive asking me a question, and it was boiled down to, why do we need training? What does it matter? And I took a step back, and at that point we had been giving this person reports. Here's 5 billion completions. Here's this. Here's that. And I'm like, I need to be able to tell the data story. And so I started with the end, with what the answer was that executive was looking for. And I was able to weave the analytics into essentially an elevator pitch, a story, a data story that came and gave those executives the answers that they were looking for so they could make those business decisions. Now, in different organizations across different companies that I've worked for, the executives have been looking for answers to different questions, but ultimately, the way that I found success is being able to record that data and tell a story with it.
Yep. And I know for me, we were working in the right direction, but I think the moment when that big aha came for me is very much like what Angela said, we got a request from our CHRO to see, he said, do you think you could quantify Charter's investment in training? We care about our employees. We look at the training that we put into them, as an investment in, our people. And honestly, it took me a second. I'd never thought about it before. And I went, I think we can. And so that kind of led to our first, really major foray into, like, how do we get all this disparate data and pull it together in a way that makes sense and is easy to understand. And that actually gets reported, out annually as part of our ESG reporting, is, that investment in our people. So that was a moment and something I'm proud of my team for, being able to make happen.
And I think another thing that is really important is that it is overwhelming for a lot of people. So, I know, Xyleme is a very useful tool in our organization for data, but when different groups are adopting the technology, when they can see all of the data that is available to them, it's overwhelming, and it's almost paralytic for them. So we've come up with a model where we can introduce essentially a phased approach on implementing a analytics strategy in a way that does not paralyze people with too much data, because that can be just as difficult as not enough data. So you have to find that balance, and again, weave that data into the story that makes sense for that audience.
A lot to be said. You got to start small and start somewhere. Yeah. And into you definitely need to know where you're headed before you start to bring tools and automation to play too. You've got to sketch it out, try it out with users, put it in front of executives to see if it is, useful, if it is the answer to the question they want. Get input from other groups. Maybe they even read the data differently. Have you ever had the experience where you read the data one way, somebody reads it a different way, you both interpret it very differently? So yeah. I think that's another thing too. Like, data isn't like this. It's not, when you really have good data, it sparks discussion. I saw that in the chat somewhere. So absolutely true. It sparks that discussion, and sometimes that's the value of it. Like, it's not conclusive, and you don't necessarily, have the answer, but it sparked the discussion that drove the organization forward, even if it didn't provide the answer.
Yeah, one of the things that Leslie, I have for my team is, they have to understand that good data inevitably leads to requests for more data. Like, that's what happens, and that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing.
Well, you also have to be open to the transformation that the data can ultimately lead to, because sometimes the data is giving people answers to questions that they don't, or they're not ready to hear. So that's a piece of it as well.
Yep, always full of surprises for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion in chat and also with organizations that we all speak to is we've got to generate those questions. We also have to make sure that we're meeting with business stakeholders and saying, what does learning need to accomplish? So the questions just aren't coming from the business, but also saying, as deriving what we have to have as an outcome. And I think that's what ties, pure data and analytics, like, when it rains, why do people not come to work versus more of the business needs certain things to happen. And then to the last point, connecting data and content to if these things need to happen, what does learning need to accomplish? What do people need to think and look and act like as they move through their day? What behavior are we looking for? What tasks do we want them to perform? Competency to possess? And I think that's the nexus, that happens between the data and the content, is the content has to support answering the question. Let's take a look at what the audience said as far as the registration questions. Let's dive into that. So the first question we asked was basically learning strategy, where it all gets started. On the execution of that, it has to be strongly linked to the business strategy. And I think there's a resounding yes from folks that we do have a strong link. Do you find that that was one of the success factors in your organization, Angela, when you were looking at this? Do you think that led the charge towards, well, if we have a strong link to what the business needs in the learning strategy, that's going to generate the kind of questions we need to answer through data and analytics?
I would say that for some of the organizations that work with my content platform as a service, the answer is yes. But I would say with others, the data and analytics actually drove them to building a strong link between their business and learning strategy, and that they had a primarily ad hoc or gut instinct learning strategy and business strategy previously.
How about you, Robert? What did you see? Do you think that this was the critical success factor?
I think so. I think the complication for a company like ours that is decentralized is we actually have numerous learning strategies. Each one of our major units, for example, our customer support people, our people who are out in the field, hooking up the wires and getting connected to our customers, they have very different strategies within their group. And so, trying to understand all of that, and then how do you kind of find the alignment to that is, when we're looking at an overall organizational strategy, I'll say it's a challenge, but you are still able to get in and get a picture of, where is the training happening? What is the focus? We launched a new product, and it was very clear and easy to report out that dominated the training hours, and that's where we're spending a lot of time, as that product launched. And it was, that's a great story to tell, right? Our systems were there to support the launch of this key product, and here's the data that shows how much was used in that. So, you kind of have to flex sometimes depending on the size of your organization. But it's a key part. Like, you do have to have a learning strategy, otherwise, you're just kind of wandering in the desert.
Right.
But there's nothing wrong with starting there, because that wandering in the desert is where a lot of our organizations do start. But it also, I don't know, ironically, I think that some of the groups that are at that level, they get the most creative and they're the most open to innovation and change. So I think if you one of the things that I've done is I've had a monthly meeting with the key stakeholders across the business units that I service, and I found that bringing them together brings about the most insight and thoughtful discussion and innovation because they learn from each other. And the folks that are more mired in how we've always done it, or we have a mature strategy, they're learning from those who are wandering in the desert, but vice versa as well. And it's really fun to watch that cross-pollination from the new and innovative to the strong strategic initiatives.
I think it's true. I think sometimes you can fly by instruments. Like you're in a mode. This is the data. This is how we look at it.
Yeah.
This is how it tells us. And I think sometimes we have to challenge ourselves to what additional data do I have? Or there was a great TED talk. I'm a TED Talk junkie, by the way, about, look for the blind spot. Like find the person who's always challenging you and find the naysayer in the group, or find the questioner, because they're the ones who are going to, kind of change your lens sometimes and make you look at data either in a new way or bring in another data set that might just change the whole story.
Right.
Let's take a look at the next slide, because I think this is where we begin to maybe see a little bit of a fray in the rope on what we're talking about. Is the same organizations came back and said that those business KPIs that might have been captured in the business strategy and linked to the learning strategy, we're not pushing that down effectively into the courses and training sessions as key performance indicators or their outcomes. And Leslie, I think this is the point that you always make, is this is the nexus between content and data, that if we have it connected at a high level, but we don't bake it in so that the learner knows what's expected of them and their learning objectives and training, what the outcome of that is and how it's connected towards moving the needle on performance, then there's a serious disconnect between learning being able to drive performance or drive changes in the business. How do you feel about these numbers? Is this what you're experiencing with folks that you talk to and work with every day?
Yes, I think that it's interesting that everybody has a connection to the business. Like we all have, between L&D, you have your business liaison. So we're talking to the business and we're delivering stuff to them. But the question is, in some cases, are we delivering what the business asks for, or are we delivering what the business needs? And those aren't necessarily the same thing sometimes. And it's the data that starts to point out the disconnect. So you can have this illusion that, yes, we're tightly aligned just because we're in agreement. But just because we're in agreement doesn't mean we're all headed in the right direction. We might be headed back to the desert we were just talking about. We're headed in the wrong direction. We need to turn around and head the other way. And that's where the data starts to come into play. And I think that, when you start to look at, what do we need today, but also what do we need tomorrow? And if I start to think about how I need to build my learning systems, my distribution channels, my content in order to deliver that, am I reaching the people that I need to reach? And I think that Robert and Angela was lucid that data is about segmentation. Nothing is true on the whole, ever, right? So it's always about, how do I need to segment the data and write it? What are those right segmentations that I need to look at? And there's different truths for each one of those segments. And I think a lot of times, sometimes we look at the average, or we look at the whole, and that's not the right picture.
Right. And also looking, trying to help organizations when they're developing a business insight strategy, is helping them look at the now and the future, and even putting together like the learning systems architecture and things of that nature, because people are like, well, I just need to solve this problem of today, or the problem that I had 2 weeks ago, I need it solved today. But if you're not creating solutions, or a lake foundation or analytics strategy foundation that can scale, and you're not putting the building blocks in the proper order, you should be able to, if you're working tightly with your organization and you're looking at it from the right lens, you should be able to give people what they need today to solve their problem, but in a way that also looks at the trends and sets them up for the future as well.
Yeah, I would agree with.
Let me just jump in 1 second. I want to I want to bring to your attention. You were talking about having to serve many people
Mhm.
and having many different strategies. And there was a comment in the chat about how do you serve that if you have all these departments or functional areas that have all of these disparate learning and development priorities based on disparate business environments. How do you make what's happening on this slide take place? How do we move to 100% yes? And how do we even have such a flexible and agile strategy to accomplish all of that so we can show all these business stakeholders that no matter what you threw at learning came through and delivered what it needed to deliver.
Yeah, and so I will tell you that that is a core part of what we deal with on our team is there's desire for all different types of data across the entire organization. And honestly, it's really you have to negotiate and get your partnership with your other teams that you're serving around what's the scope? Like what are we actually going to do and what can we do at scale? Because honestly, I would need a huge team of analysts to serve all of the needs across the organization. Every request that people might have. So it's trying to raise it up enough that the information is shareable across the different business units you're working with and the different stakeholders. And we're pretty tight around that. But I could see scenarios in organizations where sometimes some things are like they're the big thing. So if your company is making a big transition to a new product and one of the business units owns that, like, man, that's a time to step out and say, all right, we're actually gonna jump in and go into that. But you have to be strategic about where you apply your analytical resources every bit as much as you do your instructional design resources, your facilitation resources. All of that stuff has to be thought through strategically. And you got to keep your scope in what you can handle and be tough when people aren't happy with it.
Right.
We did this a little bit differently at Cisco within my program. So essentially what we've done is we have built a program of analytics for the centralized core data, if you will, things that my team looks at every day or we can very quickly give to anyone every day. However, to the point in the chat is all of these different business entities have different needs. So the things that we've done to allow that to scale is when we're doing onboarding, we talk about the analytics strategy and we split what we'll add to our base analytics that we can just give to anyone versus what will enable them to do. So we have some teams, some stakeholder teams that have fantastic analytics teams. So we're just giving them a feed of data and they run with it. They do whatever they want. They can scrub through all of it. And then we have other teams that don't. And maybe they have someone who knows how to use Power BI, but they have no idea how to pull data or put it together or anything like that. So we work with them on what insights are key for them. And then we build something where they're able to pull just that and they can visualize it automatically. And so we look at it much more from the vantage point of we're not trying to boil the ocean for everyone, but we're trying to enable them to boil the ocean, if you will.
Love that. Yep. And
Exactly
one of the
right.
first things, like when we're talking to customers, I mean, many of our customers, they're feeding content to lots of different systems. And step one is how do I get content from each of those systems into a single repository? So that's part of that we've been investing in is that central data repository that we can bring that data in. But then also to Angela's point, making it very easy for people to extract that data back out. So maybe I'm just a small team. You might use the built-in dashboards. And if I can add some data around the metadata that might come in with SSO around department and region and some other information, I could do some basic slicing and dicing. But if I have a team of data scientists, I'm just going to take that data out. I'm just going to extract that into my data lake and I can do whatever I want with it. So I love that idea of understanding that even within your organizations, different teams are at different maturity levels. So meeting them where they are so that then they can then take that data and then grow at their own pace. That's great,
Yeah.
Angela.
Let's take a look at the next question we asked. So the point that we've been kind of heading towards is this whole collecting, scrubbing, and stratifying. This is kind of how everyone fell out on how they feel about it. It's not unusual to have people say that the majority of folks we're getting there, we're doing okay. That's kind of about 60% of the audience. How do we move towards that 8% of the folks who say we're doing a good job? You know, we're nailing it. You know, we feel like we're comfortable. What do you think is the single biggest step to go from we're getting there and doing okay to we're doing a good job?
Filling up on data. I think that, number one is, you've got to skill up on data. They're just take basic class and basic skills, dig in and learn. To some extent, I think you start by, you've got to build a little bit of self-sufficiency so that you have some skills. As even Angela, the one team, they Power BI was their starting point and they figured out, and then she was able to give them that feed. But I think that you can't be afraid of building those data skills. It's just mandatory, I think, today.
Mhm.
I think that's step
Right.
one.
Right. And also understanding your business and your business needs so that you can articulate those questions that you need data to answer.
Yeah, and one of the things that we found critical is getting some form of governance over the data itself. Once we dove into the data that we had available, we realized that it was chaotic. There weren't controls around what people could enter. We looked at subject data, for example, and we had hundreds and hundreds of subjects that were, variations of the same things, over and over, said with different words, those sorts of things. So, I think really understanding what data you are overseeing and getting governance and standards in place around how does that data get collected. I don't know if I would call that the first step or the most important step, but it's got to happen. It absolutely has to happen.
Yeah, to your point, Robert, this is probably not a popular thing to say, but take the power out of the users when it comes to the categories of how you want to segment your data. So even things like keywords, a lot of people want to do free form keywords, and it's like, no, let's standardize. And if we need 500, that's fine, but we're going to standardize them. We're going to put them in the system, and you choose from a drop down and you add those to your content. You don't just type them, because to your point, you can have 500 variations of the same keyword.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's one place I'm encouraged about AI. And of course, it had to come up at some point. But I think
Yeah.
that idea of being able to if it does anything well, it may hallucinate as well too, but classify data. And I think that's helping a lot with the data cleansing. So some of the newest tools that you've looked at that help with the mechanics, and that's the other thing, the tools just keep getting easier and better to use. Will help to cleanse the data for you. And in that deduplication state, it'll find the deduplication, but also in the, let me synchronize these terms. A lot of the tools are starting to help to synchronize those terms as well, which is going to help to, I think, democratize this or just make this easier for a lot of people. So if you haven't looked at some of the ETL, the extraction pipeline tools, they're getting better and better by the day and can help with a lot of these problems.
I'm going to make a quick comment on the stratifying, and it connects to another good point in the chat about process. We were running a data and analytics workshop at our annual conference, and people were trying to understand, what did you mean by stratification? And we were trying to say dimension and timing, and everyone was scratching their head saying, is that kind of like analyst talk? So the example I gave them is even if you do a great job of collecting and scrubbing data, if you're in a situation where performance reviews happen once a year at best in most organizations, and people are learning every day, how do you stratify that? Where's the feedback coming in order to make learning more effective? If you don't have people talking and giving feedback to the learners on a regular basis, You don't want to find out in your performance review whether you hit your learning objectives or not. So even stratifying is understanding the timing and the sequence of the data that you're using from other parts of the organization. And back to Leslie's point, I mean, you, the centralized technological business intelligence AI approach of doing this is going to make things a lot easier. Let's take a look at the next question. So this is the heart of the matter, right? We've been nibbling all around it, around the edges of this, but now we're coming right out and asking is, do we feel like our team is experienced and working on the issue, data and analytics? You know, do we feel we're comfortable with our own competencies and skills in order to accomplish this? And again, not surprisingly, that 60% of those organizations of our registrants today said somewhat, which somewhat doesn't necessarily make them experienced, which means they're feeling like there may be a gap or a ways to go. And what do you do if you're in that 57% or even the 29% that says, you know, we don't feel like we have any experience whatsoever in handling this? What do you say to those organizations?
Jump in. Best thing to know
Jump.
is jump in. You just kind of, well, you learn by doing. We all know that from adult learning. I mean, we're learning people, and we know people learn by doing. So step one is jump in, even if it's just Excel and a pivot table and basic, you know, statistics on data, and then bring in something else, and then, you know, pick Power BI, maybe that's the next tool. And then maybe you go to something like, you know, more RapidMiner, like an AI type based tool. I mean, you know, just kind of jump in and, you know, and then also I'm a big Coursera dropout. I don't always finish it, but there's great stuff. I mean, there's lots, there's like no excuse for not learning stuff. Okay? There's plenty of stuff out there.
Yeah.
But you go, you know, there's a lot of ways to educate yourself around data.
Yeah, I think also not expecting to be a data expert is something that learning and development organizations need to accept, because they can be experts in what a learning and development organization needs with regards to data, but they don't necessarily have to be data analysts. And one of the things that I found is if you pair a few learning experts with a few actual real data analysts and they start to learn each other's language, that's really where the marriage of power is.
Yeah, I agree with what both Leslie and Angela said. I think one of the comments I've seen pop up several times in the chat aligns here, like, get an understanding of what you want to do. Like before you start trying to figure out this incredibly vast world of data analytics and, you know, get yourself buried in all kinds of like
numbers.
What do you do? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Before you immerse yourself in the data, give yourself like a place to play. Like, what questions are you trying to answer? And you may not get them all right the first time. You know, and I saw a chat comment pop up about, like, sometimes the data drives your strategy, because you look at the data and you go, wait, what is this? And you start asking questions around that. So those types of dynamics can happen, but kind of first step is really get an idea of what you want to go after, so that you kind of can shrink down your potential field. Then the other thing I would say is, you know, ask yourself the question, does your L&D team have to be the analytics team? You know, I'm aware of companies and, you know, peers and friends of mine who, you know, they don't do that. They hand it off to a business intelligence team, and because they're sharing their data, it becomes part of the larger data set that the BI team is using.
Yeah, well, I think that's where the education comes into play. And the Coursera, like the heavy strategists within the L&D organization learn to have that high level conversation so they can get out of the business intelligence team what they need.
I guess in wrapping up on this too is, what's your definition of experience? It was kind of a loaded question, I think.
For sure.
I think if we had asked people simply, how do you feel about analyzing learning data? Then, you'd probably get more of a shift to the left. But it was not to catch people on this, but when we put the terminology data and analytics together, we kind of get people to think like now we're jumping to full-blown data science and have to go back to school and do all this. But as several people were mentioning in the chat, as well as Robert pointed out, is it's marrying up what questions that you're trying to answer, and then just going through the information and connecting the dots, as Leslie pointed out, as to, are we being able to generate sufficient answers to those questions based on the data that's been put in front of us? Can we create a connection between the progress of learners and their change in behavior on the job, that level 3 Kirkpatrick mysterious measure that we're always going after, and the resulting level 4, did we see a change in performance? It could be as simple as asking managers, do you see the changes? Are people moving in the right direction? So I think the take home message here is Leslie said it, you got to get in, jump into the deep end of the pool and get started, but realize that you're just looking at things that you're already familiar with and trying to derive answers from that. Let's take a look at the next question. Here it is, Leslie, the quintessential question. So I'm going to start with you, since you're the technology expert. It's split. It's a coin flip for people that are listening today as to whether or not they feel they have the right learning technology. What is the right learning technology for learning data and analytics?
Well, it's probably several different things. But I think, first of all, you have to have your data in a central repository. So how are you going to get your data in a similar format? So, learning record store is a good one, standard. If you can get your data from each of the different systems into that central repository, now you can look across the different activities. Kind of we were talking about earlier, you could drill down into a single course or an event, or maybe it's a curriculum. So you had an initiative to drive sales performance over the first half of the year. So you could look deep, but you might also want to look broad. Like, is a certain type of remediation or tactic working well? And does it maybe work better in engineering versus sales versus HR? But step one to being able to get the data is you just got to get to the data. So being able to get that, pull it out into a central repository. It's all in the same format. Many of us have spent how many hours of our life taking different spreadsheets and trying to match them up with the columns. So if you can get that, now you have something to build off of. And so that's part of what Xyleme does. We bring that data from your different systems into our learning record store. So it's in a central repository. But then many of our customers, like 2 on the phone, they also take that data out, and then they're going to mix it with other data within the organizations as well. But it definitely helps to jumpstart that data. And the second I say is break down those silos, get the data from your other teams that you can mix with it.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that this is almost a trick question, because I think the people who answered no or somewhat experienced or not experienced on the previous few questions, they would have a different answer to whether or not they have the right learning technology in place to support data and analytics strategy. Because I know just amongst my own stakeholders and the folks that I work with, there are people who are like, oh, it's checked as done. Yeah, as long as it's checked as done, that's all the data and analytics that I need, because they're on the lower end of the maturity model with their learning strategy and their analytics strategy. And then I have other teams that are like, I still don't have as much data as I need. I need more. So I think this answer, it depends on how you're reading this question.
Yeah, and
what lens you're looking at it from.
Yeah, and I think what I would add is you have to have a mindset of learning data is a first-class citizen among the data for your organization.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a, oh, this little thing on the side, we don't want to bother you. Like, it's a first-class citizen. And that applies to thinking about your data technology as a peer to the other types of technology. You would choose an LMS. You wouldn't just kind of wing an LMS kind of sideways. You probably shouldn't. You may, but not a good idea. You kind of don't want to wing data either. You want to think of having, you know, what is my data technology and how is that paired with my other, you know, parts of my technology stack.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think this links back to one of the points that we made in inviting everyone today to the roundtable was that central repository for learning and content. You know, if we're really going to try to understand real time the interaction between, I'm putting a lot of time and energy into building this content, like when we do with a platform like Xyleme, you want to have the data that supports the thesis around how that's going interconnected. You want it there in one place. You don't want to have to be bouncing back and forth. So I think the key to this question was the right learning technology, not just the right technology,
Yeah.
but the right learning technology that can have both of those things take place
Well,
simultaneously and make it easy for learning and development professionals to work with that.
and the centralized repository is key because if you're distributing content, even the same content across 15 or 20 different distribution points, but you're able to consolidate the analytics and you're not comparing data from 15 different systems, you've got that core set of analytics in that one central repository. That's been the game changer for the BEs that I've been working with.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, Angela said you want to make sure that's all there because you know, whether you want that learning tool to be able to react to the fact that maybe the learning that's going out to this group is highly effective, but the same learning that we're pushing out to a different group, it seems to have similar roles and responsibilities and need for that learning aren't progressing at the same rate or aren't getting it. And you want to be able to real time course correct in your learning or remediate learning in order to get that other group to be moving. You have to be able to personalize and do that at the speed of which people need to learn. So it's an interesting question that probably we'll have to leave to the audience to think about more. I know we're coming up on time. I wanted to thank everyone in the audience for joining us and great dialogue that was going on in the chat. I want to thank Angela, Robert, and especially Leslie for her and her team sponsoring this roundtable. Any closing thoughts before we sign off from our panel?
Like Leslie said, dive in.
Yeah.
Take a step.
No water wings, right? Just
No
gotta go right
water,
into
we
the.
just gotta jump off the deep end. Like my little sister, when she was 3 years old and we set her up on the high dive, we're like, oh, she jumped too. My mom jumped right out after her, but
And it's okay to experiment and just, you know, have fun with it. Have some challenges, you know, pose different questions to your team and have them go explore and come back and give you the answers and see what happens.
absolutely.
Great words of wisdom. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
We
Michael.
really
Thanks, all.
enjoyed this. Look
was
forward
fun.
to the recording and other materials. Have a great day wherever you are, and we'll speak with you soon.
Excellent.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.